The Book of Proverbs can be found in the middle of our English Bibles, near in the middle of the wisdom section in the Old Testament. It's found in the middle of the writings in the Tanakh in the Hebrew Bible. And Proverbs is one of those books that a lot of people know about. Even people who don't know a lot about religion are aware of some of the Proverbs, at least. It's a very famous book, and justly so. We do well to explore it, consider what Proverbs is all about, and what we can gain from it. Proverbs is generally associated with Solomon. Makes sense, since the book begins, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Right? In 1 Kings chapter 4, his wisdom, of course, is infamous, and the fact that he wrote a number of Proverbs. But not all Proverbs are about Solomon. Solomon lived probably around 950 BC, and the vast majority of the book of Proverbs is written by him or collected and compiled by him, but not all of it. It's interesting, about Proverbs 25 through 29, you've got a section of Solomon's Proverbs, but written down by Hezekiah, king of Judah, about 250 years later. You also have the sayings of the wise in chapter 22 and following. Also, you have the words of Agur in chapter 30, and the wisdom that King Lemuel's mother gave him in chapter 31. Now, some rabbinic sources would just associate them with Solomon, but they are likely distinct people, and that wisdom was seen as sufficiently valuable to be incorporated into the book of Proverbs. In Proverbs chapter 22, there's a saying, that, have I not written for you the 30 sayings? And it's kind of been something that a lot of people have been confused about for years, but we've discovered an Egyptian document called the Wisdom of Amenophi, or Instruction of Amenophi. And it very famously has 30 sections, or 30 chapters, and it was kind of known as the 30 sayings. And it was written probably 100, 150 years before Solomon, maybe 100, 200 years before Solomon, something of that level, and it was very strongly honored and valued for its association with wisdom. And this is something very important to keep in mind, that yes, as we're going to see in Proverbs, verse 7 of chapter 1, fearing Yahweh is the beginning of discernment, but fools have despised wisdom and moral instruction. There are lots of statements like that shows that, yeah, Proverbs is for Israel. Proverbs written directly to the Israelites and in an Israelite context. But there's a lot of wisdom here that would have been just as honored and valued and cherished in Egypt, in Assyria, in Babylon, for that matter, Canaan, in Aram, in Edom, all these areas around them. That the wisdom literature is a very prominent theme in the ancient Near Eastern world. We don't just have the book of Proverbs. Like I said, there's Egyptian examples. We have examples from the Mesopotamian world. This is a constant kind of thing. And it was in that theme, by the way, of a father instructing his son. That was the primary vehicle of wisdom instruction. And so it's a very popular genre in the ancient Near Eastern world. And so it's one of those points of connection that Israel has with the rest of the world around it in ways that are not somehow resisting God's ways. It is a way that's not necessarily contrary to God's purposes, especially when we think about Proverbs in many ways as worldly wisdom, as the way of living in the world. And we need to keep that in mind as we consider how we apply perhaps some of the lessons from the book of Proverbs. So when the book was compiled, we don't know. Clearly after 700, since Hezekiah has some of it. But we can certainly see it's written in Israel. We can gain a lot from it as well. And of course, one of the open questions is, what are the things that we can kind of filter right through Jesus and in ways that we can apply to this day without much change? What are some of the Proverbs we may need to think a little bit more deeply about, or to consider perhaps in a slightly different way in light of what God has made known in Christ? So what's going on in Proverbs? Well, Proverbs has sections, but the way the sections work is not exactly the same as most books of the Bible. The material is very similar throughout. In the first 9 chapters, you get what we call much more of a thematic way of presenting wisdom. When we say thematic, it means that you've got themes that kind of go through at least a few verses. So the beginning of the book is to learn wisdom and moral instruction, to discern wise counsel, to receive moral instruction and skillful living with righteousness, justice, and equity, to impart shrewdness to the morally naive, a discerning plan to the young person. Let the wise also hear and gain instruction. Let the discerning acquire guidance, to discern the meaning of a proverb and a parable, and the sayings of the wise and their riddles. Right. So notice that even that introduction explaining, we're setting forth wisdom. We're setting forth what is wise, how you should live. But it does it in 6 verses. And those verses are all kind of connected and associated with one another. And that's why we talk about thematic. You have themes here. You have a whole discourse is set forth. And a lot of it is as a father's instruction to his child. So in verse 10, my child, if sinners try to entice you, do not consent. And that will go on for 8 more verses about not associating with sinners when they're doing bad things and suffering the consequences with them. In chapter 1 and verse 20, wisdom calls out in the street. And we see wisdom embodied here, crying out for people to come and listen to her and to make sense of, to be sensible. And if you don't, you're going to suffer the consequences, right? And that goes through the rest of chapter 1. And so that's the thematic concept here. In chapter 2, we see the benefit of seeking wisdom, and if they turning to wisdom, and how it will go well with you, and of course, if not, it will not go so well with you. The importance of not forgetting the teaching that the child's been taught in chapter 3. To find favor and understanding inside of God and people, to trust in God, and to live according to all of these principles and standards, and the blessings that come from obtaining wisdom and manifesting wisdom in relationships with other people. Chapter 4, there's more encouragement to follow righteousness and to avoid wickedness. The fact that Solomon thinks about listening to his own father, right? And listening to all of this wisdom and how they're supposed to live. And you have all these different principles, right? Gain understanding. Don't enter the path of the wicked. Stay the ways of the righteous, right? And listen to my saying. And this is encouragement. Listen to what I have to say over and over again. It's probably to drill in. Listen to what I'm saying. Listen to what I'm saying. Kind of try to subconsciously, you need to hear this wisdom. You need to accept it. You need to be open to it. Chapter 5 and 6 and 7, you have different things, but there's very much emphasis on avoiding adultery. And so in chapter 5, avoiding the adulterous woman, and the importance, of course, of staying faithful to one's own spouse. Drink water from your own cistern and running water from your own well. Should your springs be dispersed outside, your streams of water in the wide plazas, let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife you married in your youth. A loving doe, a graceful deer, may her breast satisfy you at all times. May you be captivated by her love always, and not by the adulteress. Chapter 5. Chapter 6, warnings about getting caught in a pledge for a neighbor, to surety for a loan. What happens if you are sluggard and do not, are not active in labor, compared to, for instance, what the ant is doing, right? And as the witness, that don't hold fire close to you, and therefore, the idea of being flirty with somebody you're not married to, etc., etc. Chapter 7 especially, the warnings of the adulterous woman. And in fact, it's a very long story in chapter 7, like an extended parable of a woman who has grabbed a naive, simple man who into adultery, and it's not going to go well for him. And so the whole story is told and why you need to avoid it. Chapter 8, wisdom it becomes embodied. So you have Lady Wisdom crying out to call out to people to listen and to hear, and to what the benefit of wisdom is and why they should come and heed her. And wisdom is very much spoken of kind of as part of the establishment from the creation, very much with God from the creation, very much why a lot of times conversations about Jesus and wisdom are often there, the word and wisdom. And that also led to unhelpful things, since wisdom talks about being the first of God's creation, that led all kinds of issues in the Arian heresy. But that's a very different story for another time, but that was rooted here in Proverbs chapter 8. In chapter 9, wisdom's building her house, will those who, live in it, and to come and gain understanding from her by doing that. So, if you notice, as we said here, there's themes here. There's kind of all these exhortations to listen to wisdom. In fact, first 9 chapters tend to exhort more about the wisdom than giving it. Not saying that it doesn't have wisdom, but there's more exhortation than we're expecting. But in chapter 10 through 31, even in the sections that are, essentially 10 through 29, especially even the sections that aren't necessarily from Solomon, still much more what we call aphoristic. What does that mean? Well, the what we're used to with Proverbs, right? Like the first one, a wise child makes a father rejoice in Proverbs 10:1, but a foolish child is grief to his mother. It's a one-liner, right? Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, in verse 2, but righteousness delivers from death. What does verse 1 and verse 2 have to do with each other? Maybe nothing. Maybe even within the couplet, the first part and second part may not have much to do with each other. Maybe the second one emphasizes or intensifies the first. Or maybe it's a contrast, right? Verse 4, the one who is lazy becomes poor, but the one who works diligently becomes wealthy. So you see the contrast involved, right? And it's a one verse thing and it goes on to something else. Or maybe it just expands on the next verse. But you don't have the thematic situation like you have in these other, in the earlier part of Proverbs. And so this is what we think of most of the time we think of Proverbs. And even here already, we've seen some of the major themes, right? And so we're not going to go through the whole book in terms of all the different ones. We're going to look at the major themes. And even we've already seen many of the major themes. The first major theme that we saw there, folly versus wisdom. That's probably the biggest one, right? What does the wise person look like? What does the foolish person look like? What are the results for those who live in wisdom or those who live in foolishness? And not only that, we see parenting as well, and in the verse 1 there. Remember, we talk about categories, a lot of times they're going to overlap. So, wise child makes a father rejoice, a foolish child is grieved to his mother. We also see here righteousness and wickedness, wealth and poverty in these other verses. Treasures gained by wickedness don't profit, righteousness delivers from death. Right? But also verse 3, Yahweh satisfies the appetite of the righteous, but he thwarts the craving of the wicked. The one who is lazy becomes poor, and the one who works diligently becomes wealthy. This is the one we really need to talk about, and that's wealth versus poverty. Because there are a lot of associations in Proverbs between wealth and expending energy, and poverty and laziness. And when we take these absolutely, it becomes a problem. And you can even see that here in light of Job and Ecclesiastes. And it's not even just about wealth here. It's also about righteousness and wickedness, which is another major theme of the Proverbs, right? The righteous versus the wicked. What the fruit of righteousness versus the fruit of the wickedness. So notice, treasures gained by wickedness don't profit, but righteousness delivers from death. But yet Job's going to talk about how sometimes the wicked prosper, and sometimes the righteous suffer even to death. The preacher in Ecclesiastes is going to lament everybody dies. The righteous and the wicked all die. So ultimately, even if you are the most righteous, the most wise, you still die. You still suffer that penalty. And so this is where the danger comes from taking Proverbs absolutely and say, well, Proverbs here says, righteousness delivers from death. Therefore, if we escape death, we're righteous. It says here, the treasures of the wicked don't profit. Therefore, the wicked don't really profit. Look, it says that the one who is lazy becomes poor, but the one who works diligently becomes wealthy. Those who are wealthy, therefore, work diligently. Those who are left poor, therefore, must be lazy. Those conclusions are the problem, right? And the problem is that Proverbs talks about maybe the way things should be sometimes, right? But it's not the way it always works. There are times when righteous people suffer. There are times when wicked people prosper. There are a lot of people who have billions of dollars and have not expended any effort to obtain it. They obtain it through inheritance. There are people who've worked multiple jobs and worked themselves to the bone and are still in poverty. So we understand the general tendencies, and we should be reading these mostly about ourselves. We should not be trying to project these out onto other people. We should be reading this for ourselves and how we should be living our lives, that we should be diligent in our efforts, that we should pursue righteousness, and that we should understand that if we do that, we have a good prospect that if we work diligently and we seek righteousness, that things should go well with us. If things don't go well with us, we should maybe criticize and challenge ourselves at times, but as we can see in the New Testament, there are a lot of times where the righteous suffer because they're being persecuted for their faith, or because they're receiving resistance, or maybe just because of this the way the world works. And that's why the apostles have to so encourage the Christians in those situations to not despair, to not second-guess their commitment to Jesus. And that's why we need to be careful at how we understand some of these proverbs, especially when it relates to righteousness, wickedness, and especially poverty and wealth. Another major one is when it comes to things like how someone speaks, right? Speech and what we say at the mouth. So verse 18 here, the one who conceals hatred utters lies, and the one who spreads slander is certainly a fool. When words abound, transgression is inevitable, but the one who restrains his words is wise. What the righteous say is like the best silver, but what the wicked think is of little value. So notice that you can probably see a few points of connection in these, but it's just kind of providing extra explanation of these things, and there's no need for that in Proverbs. But we see here, and again, connections between words and righteousness, words and wisdom, words and folly, right? And the importance of speech, and how our words can be used to build up, how our words can be used to tear down, how our words can show us wise or demonstrate us foolish. things of that nature. And again, so much about folly and wisdom as throughout, as we would come to expect. God abhors dishonest scales, but an accurate weight is his delight. So a lot of times God is invoked, and something about God or something God believes in. And of course, that you go to Leviticus and look at that, about the importance of having honest weights. And so here is the importance of being honest in your dealings, maintaining appropriate weights so you're not really stealing from people. And that he will invoke God, especially when it's something that really wants to add that little punch in there, right? You also have things that would involve kings or leadership. So in Proverbs 11, 14, where there is no guidance, the nation falls, but there is success in the abundance of counselors. That's not necessarily something that, sure, in your own life you should heed counsel from others as opposed to do it on your own. That's something certainly that a king should hear, right? And that's very important. Of course, there's also the one who loves discipline loves knowledge. The one who hates reproof is stupid. In chapter 12 and verse 1. So again, this heeding wisdom, right? The difference between accepting it versus rejecting it. Very prominent theme throughout the entire book of Proverbs. And we see this all very consistently. Also a lot about relationships, husband-wife, or just family relationships. Proverbs 17:1, better is a dry crust of bread where there is quietness than a house full of feasting with strife. Right, so there's a lot of Proverbs, things of that nature. Very important. Going back to the king theme, Proverbs 16:12, doing wickedness is an abomination to kings, but because a throne is established in righteousness. And he goes other ones about kings and things of that nature there. So we can see here throughout. All of these are the kind of things you see throughout, and chapter after chapter after chapter of these things, trying to encourage wisdom, encourage righteousness, encourage productivity, discourage folly, discourage evil, discourage taking advantage of other people, maintaining a good relationship with one another, speaking well to and with another. You got some about wine is a mocker and a strong drinker, beer is a brawler. Whoever goes astray by them is not wise, in verse 1 of chapter 20. Should keep in mind that they're all drinking wine. The issue is not do you, it's how much and in what contexts throughout. So why you should not look at it when it's red in the cup, because you should be watering it down, so it should be pink in the cup. These are the kind of themes that we see throughout the book of Proverbs. And as I said, we get toward the end here. Chapter 30 is the wisdom of Agur. And chapter 31, very famously, the wisdom the king Lemuel's mother has for him. Including give beer to the one who is perishing and wine to those who are bitterly distressed. Let them drink and forget their poverty, remember their misery no more, in verses 6 and 7. One of those that's always an interesting one to remember in terms of, well, do we just take Proverbs and just make them applicable to this day without any kind of consideration of covenant difference? And that's also something about the wise woman. The Proverbs ends with the woman of valor, right? The wise woman, which very encouraging passage to see the kind of different characteristics, but we need to keep in mind she has servants. She's a wealthy woman. She is among the elite. We should not. This should not be used to kind of grind down women today who don't have some of those same opportunities and blessings. And so it should be a source of encouragement and not, something to discourage and grind down women. Of course, that's true about all of Proverbs, and hope that we can see that throughout Proverbs. There's a lot of great wisdom here. A lot of great insights here. And we just go through it and read it a couple times, you're not going to really get it. You need to really let it sit, let it flow through you, really let it become part of you. But we need to remember in James warns us that there's the earthly demonic wisdom of below, and there's the godly divine wisdom from above. And a lot of Solomon's Proverbs you can look at divine wisdom, right? Instruction in God, fearing God. But some of the things he says are things that are that practical wisdom about how you live in the world that may not sit as well in terms of what it means to follow God in Christ. And so again, we need to use discernment as we consider the book of Proverbs, how we apply the book of Proverbs, and how we judge others in terms of what we see in the book of Proverbs. But there's a lot of great benefit and profit in it. We certainly hope that you consider it. So glad you joined us. Please let us know if you have any comments or questions and continue our conversation in the comments. I'm Ethan with the Adventist Church of Christ. We want to be of encouragement service to you. Please reach out to us at AdventistChurchOfChrist.org. You can also find us online at Adventist Church of Christ. We again thank you. May the Lord bless and keep you until we're able to meet again.